Locke, President and CEO of Marimaca Copper, reporting to you live from Antofagasta, where I've just spent a day on site with the team and talking to you today about further drill results that continue to confirm our thesis on Pampa Medina.
Well, I think it seems to be more than confirming. Some of the grades were quite impressive, actually. What can you tell us from the press release?
So look, there's two aspects to it that I think are interesting. The first is that Oxide intersection, which was nearly 50 metres at 2% in a broader zone of 160 metres at 1%. That is a material extension to the Oxide envelope and certainly higher grade than what our current interpretation of the block model is. So that's a positive. We see further growth in the Oxide portion of the resource there. And then these big step out holes that, we're doing quite an aggressive drill campaign where we're stepping out in big step outs, 900 meters to the south. We hit the same sedimentary horizon. It was mineralized. Okay, some of it was a little bit thinner, but there were certainly some zones that were north of 20 meters at 1.5%. There was one that was nearly 40 meters at 1.5%. And if you remember, my original comment was I'm looking for things that are 20-meter true thickness at north of 1% to be ore grade in an eventual mine. And so, it continues to confirm the thesis that Sergio put forward. We're happy about it. We're going to continue to do step-out holes and look at to try to define how big this thing is.
Okay, well, look, obviously we're not talking about resource definition at this point. It's kind of, but you're talking about some big step outs, conceptual step outs, and how much of that is about geological model confirmation, or in fact, how do you view this 30,000 meter program of yours?
So there's two aspects to the 30,000 meter program. About 2/3 of that program will be continuing to step out on 300 meter spacings, both to the west and on north-south fences on 300 meter spacing. So that is a fairly aggressive approach to exploration. And the reason we're taking that approach is, we've made this comment about sedimentary basins, sedimentary-hosted copper deposits. They tend to be laterally and regionally quite extensive. And so we want to try and define the limits before we go back and plan our really, fulsome infill program to try and get ourselves to an inferred resource. So the first phase, 20,000 meters about extensions. 10,000 meters of that will be put towards drilling on a slightly tighter spacing to just try to join the dots between these high-grade zones and see if there's geological continuity on a slightly tighter spacing to just give us some more confidence in the overarching thesis. We're now confident that this sedimentary horizon, which is mineralized, is very extensive. And now we want to start sort of moving ourselves towards defining what the grade continuity is and the thickness continuity is between those fences.
And what about some of these more complex issues in terms of defining the kind of fault zone? Because when I was looking at one of the diagrams there, you kind of got this kind of fault block geometry going on. How do you drill those things?
It's just it's a function of drill holes into the deposit. And so we're not going to get a good handle on that until we start doing the more detailed infill campaign, which is aiming to get to a resource, an inferred resource on 100 by 100 meter spacing. Yes, we're realizing now that the post-mineral diking is very important for, how this deposit is formed. But what's interesting about that drill hole is all of those discontinuities in the mineralization are post-mineral, which means they occurred after the deposit was in place. And even with that discontinuity, we're still seeing good grades and thicknesses on either side of it, which indicates again that there is continuity where those late stage post-mineral dikes and faults don't exist. We would expect there to be interesting mineralization that could potentially form part of the mine plan at some point.
Right, and so where are you focused on? What is it in terms of north or west in terms of trying to increase the kind of probability of expanding that?
So we're drilling to the west, so we're stepping out to the west. We think we found a reason that we're less interested to the east. There's an uplifted fault block in the east, which has just caused a thinning of the sedimentary horizon, which makes it less interesting. It's still mineralized. We've still drilled some really interesting zones of oxide mineralization at surface, so it will logically be our focus at some point. But at this stage, we're stepping out to the west on 300 meter spacings. And then we're continuing to step out to the north. But these drill holes in the south, 900 meters to the south, were a surprise. They were thicker, higher grade zones than we were expecting in that area where we thought it was going to be thinning. So I think we'll do a couple more drill holes to the south as well.
Right, and how are you kind of mapping this data, these results to kind of geophysical data in terms of the gravity, seismic, EM, etc.? Is it what you thought, or is it a pleasant? You said it's a bit of a pleasant surprise to the south, but generally, is it mapping to what you thought?
It is. It really is. So we did an AMT survey, which is all about the resistivity. Now, the risk of the resistivity survey is, any sulfide can create a resistivity low. But what we're seeing in the drilling is a fairly good correlation between the drilling that we're doing with the AMT resistivity low and then sulfide intersections in the sedimentary horizon. So that's a real positive. There are some zones of higher pyrite grade, which is obviously not valuable, but is still a sulfide and can deliver that very low resistivity. But in general, we're continuing to see the confirmation of Sergio's exploration model in every drill hole that we drill, even the ones that hit these post-mineral dikes and faults.
And are there any kind of specific gaps that you're also going to be addressing as part of this geological model, in terms of that dike density, etc.?
Yeah, I think it's only about getting more drilling data that's going to allow us to formulate a more detailed model on the dikes, but it is very important. What we're also, interestingly, our previous interpretation of the mineralization was that the dikes were completely barren. But we've just reviewed all of that information, and we're now seeing that the dikes aren't completely barren. There is definitely some mineralization going into those dikes. So where we previously had a zero in our thought process around those dikes, it's actually now going to be some sort of mineralization in there. It's not going to be the super high grades that we've seen in the sedimentary horizon, but it all adds tons in the end.
Right, and then obviously you talked a little bit about the oxides and the kind of grades you're seeing there. At what depth are the sulfides appearing?
Well, it depends on where they are in these fault block structures. And what's interesting is you can very clearly see that the faulting has occurred after the oxidization event. And so sometimes the oxides can be relatively deep in a downdrop fault, and sometimes the oxides can be right at surface. And so there is variability on the depth in those sulfide intersections. Some of them 200-300 meters downhole, some of them 500-600 meters downhole. So there's definitely variability, and hence the point you made is a good one, which is the faulting is going to become very important, and we'll get a better understanding of that as we get more drill density.
Right. Okay. So drilling density, especially the cost coming up as you learn more. In terms of the current intercepts, are you trying to work out whether this could be a standalone resource, or is it more likely to be a satellite at this stage?
Certainly, we view the oxides as a satellite. The sulfides is a very different beast, and it almost certainly is a different processing methodology. And based on what we're seeing now and the sort of numbers that Sergio's throwing around internally, it's almost certainly a standalone. You would piggyback from the infrastructure of the mod, but what we're seeing is actually quite a lot of upside in the oxide resource. I remember I was saying to you that the reason we acquired Pampa Medina was because we thought it added 20,000 tonnes of additional incremental copper for at least 10 years of mine life. We're now forming a view that it's going to be significantly more than that. Not just already on the existing resource, we're seeing upside in that, but also with these extensional holes. So it's really a complementary story first, which is how do we go from 50,000 tonnes of cathode to 70,000 or more for an extended period of time, and then over the course of the next 5 years, drilling out the sulfide and working out what on earth is going on down there.
And look, I know it's early days, but the numbers look good. I'm trying to sort of understand the kind of variability in copper grade that you're starting to see compared to other kind of Chilean manto systems. Is it too early, or are you seeing some sort of consistency or even slightly erratic behavior? How are you viewing it?
It's very early to be calling that just on the drill spacing. What we know is as you drill you infill that spacing, the variability will become more apparent. But what we're seeing is very consistent zones of more than 20 meters at more than 1% copper in just about every drill hole that we're intersecting. I think the bigger question now is I have always been saying that I thought that this was 100% an underground opportunity, and we have to be thinking about this as an underground opportunity. What we're doing now is going back and reviewing these drill holes from let's assume for a second that it's actually a low-grade, large tonnage deposit, and how thick is this sedimentary horizon that's mineralized. And it looks like the sedimentary horizon is on average north of 200 meters thick and is fairly consistently mineralized. And so perhaps potentially I've jumped the gun and been thinking about this in the wrong way. I know Nico, our head of Corp Dev and strategy, is saying to me he thinks it's a super pit. So I've had to check my original assumptions of the door and say, let's just drill, and then we'll work out, how we would approach this. Certainly John Carlo Bruno said he thought that it was potentially an open pitable opportunity in the fullness of time. And with this geological reviewing that we're doing at the moment, we've realised that actually we cut out quite a lot of lower grade material in a halo around the high grade core, which would certainly suggest that there is the potential, as we drill it out, that this might not be an underground opportunity. It might be something completely different.
Okay, so you kind of got this higher grade cores. Are they sort of akin to like a feeder zone? Is it? What are you chasing? I don't know, chalcopyrite, bornite. How do you kind of vector and zone in on these higher grade zones?
So it's really interesting. The marker horizon tends to be a black shale interbedded between these sandstones. So you see a sandstone unit with these interbedded black shales, and those black shales tend to be a marker of relatively high grade mineralization. In most of the drill holes that we're seeing, certainly sort of north of 1.5%. So we're starting to understand a little bit about, okay, what we're looking for as a marker horizon to get us excited that there might be something interesting. It's very early, but I'd say, in terms of this deposit, it is a sediment-hosted manto, which the sediment, based on our observations at surface, is extensive over multiple kilometres, 4 to 5 kilometres east-west, a couple of kilometres north-south. And so really it's just about trying to define a limit and then coming back and infill drilling to see if we can piece together some of that grade continuity that we know is important.
Okay, and obviously if you treat the oxides as a kind of satellite, the network's going to be all important for you. When do you get onto that?
Well, we actually are already doing a MET program for Pampa Medina oxides at the moment. So we're in the middle of columns. The data is, we already have a fairly good idea of it because of all the work we've done at Marimaca, and the mineralogy is exactly the same. The host rock is different, so that changes some of the acid consumption side of things. But in terms of the copper species that we're seeing, it is dominantly atacamite. There's no chrysocolla, which is the other species that we have at the mod. But it is a very interesting deposit. We have a huge amount of technical data available to us from the previous drill campaigns in terms of acid solubility, some cyanide soluble data, and analytical acid consumption. So we feel like we have a reasonably good handle already on the direction of travel. We've put some sort of placeholder numbers in there that we think are reasonable, valid, maybe slightly conservative in terms of our interpretation of what the economics might be. And that will be put out in the PEA when we finally get to delivering that, which I hope would be before the end of the year.
Okay, really? End of this year?
End of this year, yeah. We're well into a PEA. End of this year, we're well into a PEA. It's a standalone PEA, so I think the reason we've gone for a standalone is assuming an integration into the Marimaca DFS study would require us to re-release our DFS, and there's just a whole lot of complications of how we report that. So we've decided that we'll do a standalone as we mine, crush, leach, and produce cathode on site. And then the implication would be that if we were to do it through the Marimaca Oxide infrastructure, that there would be a significant capital cost synergy for us to do that. And we think, therefore, the project would arguably look better than the one that we're going to present when we finally release the PEA.
Okay, but you seem sort of quite calm about this. I imagine there's a few companies out how long to be jumping up and down at these grades, these sort of intercept levels. You seem to be taking it in your stride.
No, look, we're very excited about it. I'd say we know there's a lot of work to do. It's early days in terms of the understanding of the deposit. Of course, we've had a bit of a tragedy in the company with one of our directors passing away last week, and so I think it's a sober time for us. We celebrated our permit being awarded, but we also recognise that it's there's some sadness in the company as we go through this process. So I'm sure I'll be back to my usual effervescent self in the coming weeks.
Okay, well, I saw that announcement, so I'm sorry to hear that, and my thoughts with you and his son. Look, maybe we should park it up there. More drilling to come. In fact, well, what can we expect and when? PEA by the end of the year for sure. But in terms of drill results, that seems to get the juices flowing. What are we looking at?
Yeah, look, drilling's ongoing. I think there's been some frustration amongst our shareholders in terms of the timing of the drill results. And what I would say is Sergio is an exceptional geologist, and the quality of his geological work is second to none in my opinion. He really is very good at his job, and he has a very methodical process that he goes through, which does take a little bit of additional time, but it also informs our ongoing exploration strategy. We're aiming to get drill results out in batches every month or so. They're obviously it's a little bit delayed because we've got 5 rigs and a relatively small geological team, and consistency is all important in terms of the geological work we do. So we're doing our best to continue to get them out. I hope we'll have some out before the end of the year, and hopefully they'll continue to confirm what we know.
Okay, and obviously you're out there, boots on the ground. Obviously, meeting the team, but also let's say looking at the progression. You kind of is the team good? How do you kind of expand and build the team out as you kind of, because this is obviously we're talking exploration here. You've got this big super advanced build project going on at the same time. Do you need any more support yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. We're starting to turn our attention to the execution strategy right now, and in fact we're in the planning phase of all of the key hires that we need to make in the short and medium term. So my focus is now on, when we go into the execution phase, who's going to lead that for us? What's our contracting strategy? Who are we going to partner with? What's the best approach for us in terms of a junior company developing an asset from a risk perspective? So that work is all going on, and that's the reason I'm up on site at the moment, is about optimization, finding the areas where we think we've overblown the capex, focusing on the area of risk, where which risks haven't we identified properly, and how do we mitigate those before we go into a build. So there's a lot of work going on, and a big part of that is the team, because we are still a very lean team at the moment.
Okay, look, Hayden, I'm going to let you crack on and do those things. Obviously busy end of the year. There's no rest for the wicked. So we'll see you soon, sir.
Amazing. Thanks, Matt.